All right. Welcome everyone to the April meetup of SuzieQ. The session is being recorded. So as usual, we will start off with agenda bashing and community news. Then we'll, if people have any specific questions about, how do I do this with SuzieQ or whatever, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll get to the main part of the session. One of the things I realized is that I guess I realized it a while back, but you keep thinking you'll get to it sometime sooner or later, which is the lack of documentation at some level about how to use SuzieQ. Now that you've gathered all the data, what do you do with it? Last week or in last month's presentation, we covered about how to debug the poller, how to think about debugging the poller, getting it deployed, etc. This month, we will start with looking at various tables and trying to look at what questions each table answers, how to think about them, etc., etc. We'll not obviously be able to get through every single table today, but we will start there and work our way towards each table as we go on. Once we are done with the tables, we'll then start with another round where we'll be able to look at higher level questions, ask different perspectives, etc. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me, ask me questions. The more interactive this is, the better is the session for everyone. So from an agenda bashing community updates, any specific agenda bashing items that people would like to add? Okay. I have two pieces of news of SuzieQ being in the news. Eric Cho, who is well known in the network automation community for his books, Mastering Python Networking. He is studying at University of Washington, doing a course, I forget, in business and computers, I think. But in any case, he entered into an Alaska Airlines innovation contest where they were asking him how to, they were asking people that they would select 3 people who came up with the most innovative ideas. He suggested the use of SuzieQ along with some metrics to be able to conserve power in the data centers, and that won the 3rd prize. So that was exciting to see that someone in the university is now looking at SuzieQ. The second part was Senthil Gyaneshan, who is one of the people who's contributed Sonic support to SuzieQ, said that he is submitted a paper to present fabric observability with Sonic and in Sonic for Sonic's fabrics with SuzieQ. So that's happening, I believe, as part of the open source summit. I don't know if the talk has been accepted or not. He said he submitted it. So those were the 2 interesting community news that came about. Besides that, from an enterprise perspective, I continue to get a lot of interest. I'm having now roughly every week, at least one, if not more, demos. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. Also, I have some partnership engagements going on the enterprise side. That's all I had from the community update. Any other piece of news anybody would like to share? Okay. Any specific questions in terms of asking SuzieQ? Anything you guys ran into that you would like to kind of get help with? The only piece of news, one second, someone more is joining. Hey, Claudia, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Dinesh. Sorry to be late.
Oh, not at all. So I just finished agenda bashing and community updates. The basic community updates I gave Claudia was that SuzieQ was featured in 2 pieces, one from University of Washington, where Eric Chu entered a contest as part of Alaska Airlines innovation, and is using SuzieQ along with some metrics to be able to save some power in data center. That's work in progress, but that won the 3rd prize. And then someone's presenting a conference talk on fabric observability of Sonic fabrics with SuzieQ.
Nice.
Any questions with respect to asking SuzieQ any specific questions people have? That was where we were, Claudia, when you joined. One thing that has happened recently, so I wanted to mention one thing. The next release of SuzieQ, I'm hoping to, I keep saying I'll put it out next week, but there was one outstanding issue that I needed to address. One of the users had an issue with iOS where they were trying to read the iOS routing table, and it basically was the entire internet routing state. And so that was not working because it was aborting in the middle with a weird error message. We figured out what the error was, and now that is working. So with that patch in, I believe I should be able to put out a release hopefully next week. And this will be a lot of bug fixes largely, and maybe a couple of features. I'm still waiting on a couple of pull requests to be complete. One is from Stephen Corey on multicast routes, and the other is from Jeff on putting in Alcatel support. Both of them have a couple of items to be done. Once they are done, I will integrate those and put out another release. But I was waiting for that as well. That hasn't happened, but I will put out this release because there are a bunch of critical bug fixes that I think are useful. If there is nothing else, no other questions, then we will get on to the main topic, which is SuzieQ. You've started SuzieQ, you've started gathering the data. One of the things I realize talking to a lot of people is most people tend to use the show command and not much more. And so I said, like, it's useful to take a step back and kind of approach what questions can you ask of SuzieQ. And it all came about because one of the SuzieQ users said, Dinesh, before we had SuzieQ, as network operators, we had stopped asking hard questions because we never got any good answers. And now that we have SuzieQ, we are beginning to ask some hard questions. And it occurred to me that, like I said, people probably are not aware of how to go about asking some of the questions of SuzieQ. The same thing that I found, another observation I had was talking to network operators. Most people tend to skim or eyeball rather than filter. So SuzieQ has these few verbs and with a lot of filters that allows you to be able to filter a lot. For Andrea, the filters are never enough. He has always more filters he wants to do. But in general, you should be able to filter quite a bit of information so you can look for what you're seeking rather than trying to do a show and then just scrolling, trying to figure out what you want. That's not to say that that doesn't have any use, but in general, I think trying to scroll is the only choice most network operators had. And so I thought I would take some time to also show that that is not necessarily required with SuzieQ. The other thing that I noticed is most tools that are available which gather any kind of data like SuzieQ are geared either towards automation, which is scripting. So if you want to just run show commands, you can't really do anything useful. You can't really filter, or they provide pretty dashboards with, again, scripted ways of being able to look at the information that you want. And doing something in between is pretty hard for most people. Even if, for example, the tool presents a sophisticated query mechanism, the query mechanism is too sophisticated for people to use. From the start, SuzieQ's behavior has been, we want to work with the network you have, and we want to work with the network team you have. And so we allow network operators to use the medium of comfort for them, whether it is a GUI, it's a CLI, or whether it is programmatic via REST or the Python API. So with all of that said, some broad strokes or some simple ways to map some high-level questions to specific verbs. For example, if all you're looking for is an overall picture of the system, for example, whether it be a namespace, which is a site, as most people map it, whether it is devices, whether it is BGP routing tables or routing state, whatever it is that you're seeking, if you're looking like a general broad strokes picture, summarize is the verb that you would use. So device summarize, interface summarize, BGP summarize, route summarize, that should give you a bunch of useful information for you to get an overall perspective of how to think about the network. For example, a bunch of people have said like, hey, Dinesh, we have difficulty figuring out what our network looks like because of various reasons. We have had people turnover, we have had networks that have been around for a while. So, people have kind of forgotten how things work in some situations. So we don't really have a very good understanding of our network. Using Summarize, or you're a consultant, for example, or you're an MSP who's walked into a new customer site and you want to make a quick sense of what is going on in this customer's network without necessarily asking the customer a lot of questions, because sometimes even the people whose network you're trying to manage or do the work for, they don't have a very good understanding of what's going on. So in each of these cases, a very quick summary, if you want to see what's going on, is to use the summarize word. If you want to see how many different types of something are present, for example, how many different OSs do they have? How many different versions of an OS do they have? All of those questions, if you say how many different types of something is present, or how many are there of each type. For example, you want to know for example, you're trying to do a network refresh, or maybe you're trying to patch a system, and you're trying to figure out, in order for me to figure out how much time is going to take, I want to understand how many devices with, say, a particular buggy version that I have to patch are there in my network. Are there 10 of them? Are there 100 of them? And maybe you have a couple of versions that you need to patch, or a model that you want to replace. For all of those where you want to say how many of each type, unique is the verb that you would use. And I'll go through each one of these from a table perspective, step by step, but from a general broad strokes, if you don't know, if your question that you're formulating is, what are the different MTUs I have? Or how many different MTUs do you have? Or how many different interfaces have what types of MTUs? What are the MTU counts or speeds? Whenever you're thinking about how many, thinking about unique is a very good place to start. If you're trying instead to look at the top, for example, you want to know the device that has the most uptime, or a vendor that has the most uptime, or a particular OS version that has the most uptime, or you want to know which particular device has the least number of OSPF churn or interface flaps. Whenever you're thinking about most, least, think of top. And then for the rest of them, you think of show with filters to be able to help you look at the information that you're looking to get. The answer you're seeking to have answered, the question you're seeking to have answered, so to speak. I want to take a pause here to see if people have any questions on how this works. Was I clear in how you think about these 3 or 4 different verbs?
No, this is helpful. I generally hang out in the show and unique area. So
yeah, that's sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, time to start playing around with top and summarize.
Yeah. And I think, again, once you start playing with it, if you start to see that summarize is not giving you the information that you want, or that, it gives you enough, but you need something more, then please let me know. Those are things that we can easily update. So with that
Dinesh,
said, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is it worth mentioning just the difference in verb names between the CLI and the Python library?
There is no difference, actually. The only difference, I take it back. The only difference is get versus show. Because in a library, when you're pulling information, you're not really showing anything. I call it get. And in a CLI, when you're actually viewing something, you say show. Outside of that, there's really no difference between the others. Summarize is summarize, unique is unique, top is top. Have you noticed anything else, Rick?
No, that was it. It's just, I know when I started working with it in Python, the first thing I started to do is where's show? And then I realized it was get. And so that's the only thing. Obviously, there's the difference with the cert as well. But yeah, no, it's just thought I'd mention it in case anyone didn't realize.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Rick. Show and get is the only difference. And like I said, again, show is because in a CLI, you're viewing something, so it's a show. And in a library, you're getting something to operate on it, so it's a get underneath. So show calls get underneath, just to be clear. But otherwise, the filters they take, the options they take, they're all very, very similar between the CLI, the REST API, and the Python API. With that said, I want to jump into the live demo now so that we can start looking at questions and the demos. So before we do that, I also need to switch to this and move this to the other side so I'll be able to look at it. Can people see my screen still?
Yes, it's live demo.
Yeah. Okay.
And here's your CLI.
Yes, there's a CLI. Is the font size big enough for everyone?
Looks
It's
good.
good on my PC, yeah.
Okay. All right, I will start with the CLI. I'll switch to the GUI every now and then to be able to do there to show you how you could look at the same pieces of information. But again, if you feel like you want to have a specific question on how to do something either in the GUI or via REST, I'm happy to take a pause and show you how to do that. So with that said, as usual, I have got a demo set up that I play with. And let's start there. So the first question that a lot of people want to do is, hey, I've started polling. Now I want to see, have I gathered all the data? What data have I gathered? In order for you to be able to see what data you have gathered, the simple thing to do is to use table and table show. So if you use table show, you can use it across namespaces or you can use it within a namespace. So when you type table show, you will see an output that looks like this. Basically, it contains a table name. It contains the first time, the last time, and a few other columns. The basic point out of this is to look at the list of tables you have. In this case, there are about 20 tables because the last one, 21, is a total. So 0 to 19 is 20. So we have about 20 tables. Some of those, like if counters, are not really useful, or top CPU and top mem are not really useful right now. But outside of that, the rest of them are pretty useful. And OSPF IF and OSPF neighbor are captured as two separate tables, but it's really OSPF. And FS is file system, which is storage. So if you've got a device for which I'm capturing the storage, you can go look at it and see what the storage information is and what is present. But for the sake of this discussion, to start with, you look at the tables, and the first time and the last time tells you, when did you start polling? So suppose you have a question, you've been polling SuzieQ, you're running SuzieQ for a month, but you've lost track of when exactly it was present, and you want to see when something was available. But you are like, hey, I don't remember. When did I start polling? Did I start polling on the 1st of the month or the 3rd of the month? If you want to know that, just type table show, and you should be able to see the information that you're looking for. It will tell you when was the first time you started polling. So you now have a handle on how old your data is. The same thing, the last time tells you when was the last time we polled. In this case, all the data is static because it's a demo. I just kept all the data static. And basically, you'll see that we started polling at a particular point and it ended at a particular point. So the first time and the last time tells you all of that information. In this particular case, the ARP ND, the first time and the last time look a little weird because it says the first time it started polling was 903. But the last, it's 2022, sorry. That's the reason, because it's the year. I was like, what the heck? Why is 903 earlier than 829? The year is different. So basically, you have this information and you can take a look. The other thing that you can look at is look at intervals. So for example, if I run something and I say like, hey, I want to just be able to run once and take a look at what is going on and be done, then you can use run once to take a quick glance and see all the tables that have been captured. Have you captured the right number of devices? Have you captured the right number of information that you're looking for? The intervals should be a thing that will tell you. The other thing that you will notice is, since we only capture changes, this should remain constant for certain things. Like, for example, device reboots, only then should a device count change. Otherwise, in general, the device information should largely be static. All rows tells you how many different pieces of data we have. This is not just for a number of, so for example, if you've got 4 interfaces and you have 1 device, the all rows will be 4. But after that, if you have gathered the data and it has changed a bunch of times, all rows will change depending on how many times it has changed. So all rows in of itself is not very helpful, but it is useful for us in troubleshooting in various ways. The namespace count and device count obviously tell you what you're looking for. They tell you what they are doing, which is basically how many namespaces are present and how many devices are present. So if you think about it, then again, what kind of questions can tables answer? First, it can answer questions such as, did I get the data for all the tables I'm looking for? For example, let's assume that you were trying to gather data and you wanted to see BGP, but you've got like 16 spines, 16 leaves and 4 spines, but you only see 18 devices for BGP, you know right away something is wrong. For example, it could be that there was a parsing error and the parser crashed. And you wouldn't know because you didn't go take a look at the log and you didn't use the SQ poller to take a look. So this is a quick way to take a look and see whether you can eyeball whether there's a problem or not. Do I see as many devices as I expect to see with BGP? Now, obviously, if you're looking across sites, it's a little harder to be able to do. But if you're looking within a site, it's much easier. For example, you can say table show, table show. If I put a namespace and then look at it for a specific namespace, this will all be very, very specific to a namespace. So if you look at, for example, EVP and VNI, and you see there are only 6, this should be a good indication of only the number of leaves, because EVP and VNI only works on leaves and exit leaves. So if you only those devices, that count should reflect that accurately. That's an example of being able to quickly eyeball and figure out, do you have data? So you use tables for figuring out, have you gathered all the data you want to gather? Have you gathered data? When was the first time you started gathering the data in order for you to ground your query in time, so to speak? And then you can also look at when was the last time it got updated. So you can use the last time to see, is there a problem with what is going on? Did I update it a little? Has the poller crashed that I haven't paid attention to? In the open source, there is no alerting or anything. So you don't get any information if the poller had crashed, for example, because we don't restart the poller or do anything like that. So this could be another way for you to be able to take a look at whether the poller has crashed, whether the updates are working as you expect, etc. You will see during the course of this that there are many ways in which you can get the same information. Which way you choose is entirely up to you. I will present the information and sometimes I'll repeat, hey, here is how you can get it as well. You can decide which way you want to do it. There's no specific good or bad if there are 2 or 3 different ways. I can cover what is better or, what's the difference in some situations. But in general, if you have 2 ways to get the same information, they're both probably pretty good. The other thing you can do as a network operator with tables is you come in the morning, instead of stopping every table and saying like, hey, I want to see, was there any change in BGP in the last 24 hours? Was there any change in the routing table in the last 24 hours? What you can do is you can come and type in table show. And again, in the case of NXOS, let's just use that. You can specify a start time and you can say, or you can just change this and say no namespace. You can say start time is 2021 0809. And I want to see the end time as 2021 0810. What changed between those 2 times? I want to see all the tables that change. Typically, where did I make a mistake? Oh, I put it up wrong. I didn't put that. So when you put it, now you will see that nothing changed in that day. If you put a different window, you will see the change that happened. So the bottom line is, it's a very quick way to use table show with start time and end time to understand what changed in a particular period. Then you can drill down further to be able to figure out, did something change that shouldn't have changed? Why is it that I want to now? Then you can go investigate further how to go by looking at the specific table show or filter, unique, and look at the time window, etc., etc. Does that make sense?
So Dinesh, we're going to be using SuzieQ this weekend. We've got we're replacing about 10 layer 3 devices in a really short window we've been given. And we want to use SuzieQ to speed up the QA process. So I could actually do table show routes and then give it, I think we're starting at 8 p.m. Sunday night, right?
Yep.
And then when we finally get the device back up and running, and that should give us, will like list out the routes. What will we see?
No, table show will just give you. So let's do that. So you say table show this. Let's say table show. You say namespace is this, and you say table equals. I don't take table here as an option. So again, as always, you can look at the option. So this doesn't take any option. The enterprise version has a table option, but you can look at just routes if you want. But a quick way to do it, for example, would be to say route show. No, I would probably in that situation look at route summarize, but you would use table show to make sure that everything is come back. So let's assume that you said you're replacing 10 devices.
Yes.
Okay. So what I would do is I would do table show namespace equals whatever your namespace is. And then take a look and put the start time and end time. Look at the routes column and see whether the number of devices listed there is equal to 10.
Okay.
If you do that, you get a quick sense. Okay, I updated 10 devices. Looks like all 10 devices are back. Now, if it's less than that, the problem could be that when you did that, maybe you broke the routing somewhere, which caused SuzieQ to not be able to reach the device anymore. Or maybe the device didn't get updated because your update process messed up. All of get a quick, eyeball check, 10 devices got updated. Okay, now that the 10 devices got updated, I can start drilling down further if I want to.
And I mean, let's just say, we're good. And I get a table, I do a table show on the route table and I get an empty data frame. That tells me basically no changes.
No changes at all, which should not be a good thing for you.
Okay, so I should expect, thank you.
Yeah.
And I have a related question is like, is there any like native command or other thing to look at to try and diff 2 timestamps of a table?
So that's the basic command, right? If you do 2 timestamps of a single table, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess diff the data within it, not just like, because I think we're seeing the count, right? Or did I miss that?
No. So if you, in general, if you do any show with a start time and end time, what you see is the diff. That is the changes that happened in that window.
Okay, I see.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just checking to see, could I use this again? I'm trying to figure out how to really shortcut, right? Do I even need to look at anything for, for these devices? And I was just wondering if I could use table show for that. See what I think, to your point, I fully expected to be in the show routes area diffing or saying, give me the routes before we started and give me the routes now, and seeing what changed.
Yeah, exactly what I was thinking of as well.
Yeah.
You can do that too. You can do route summarize. My take would be, the trouble with everything is scale. And again, I'm looking at how would you avoid trying to eyeball everything, because at some point there is a number that will overwhelm you and you won't be able to keep that information handy. So either you'll end up with, I think everything is good when it's not, or you will just be overwhelmed. So
Dinesh, I think that maybe to clarify a bit more, what Claudia is trying to achieve is, I need to start my change for replacement. Before the change, I make a route show in this moment, and I see that I have 100 routes. And then I do my change, I replace my hardware. All the hardware is online, but am I receiving the same routes as I was receiving before? So I make a route show now, and I get whatever number of routes and make a diff of the routes before and after and see if they are the same or if there is a difference. And I know that during the time window, my routes must have changed over time because I was replacing the hardware, but at the point in time A and point in time Z, and my start and then my finish, do I have a diff between what SuzieQ knows?
Understand,
Exactly.
Andrea. I was just pointing out you can do that at multiple levels. If you start with show me the diff, you may fail to see, you may see some changes because let's assume there are 1,000 routes and all 1,000 routes change across 10 devices. You may fail to catch that one device wasn't there because you're trying to eyeball. My take is if you start with table show, the first thing you see is 10. Okay, all 10 devices got updated. Fantastic. Now I do route summarize with start time, end time to see how many routes actually change. If there were 1,000 routes and 1,000 routes changed, okay, all 1,000 routes are updated. Then I do a route show before and after to see, do I have the same number of routes? Then I can go look at, my point is you take it step by step rather than your only choice is do route show before, then do route show after and eyeball everything.
And that's, again, the question is not about eyeballing, but it's like, show me only the routes that changed.
I already answered that question by saying start time and end time. If you say start time and end time, you'll only see the routes that changed in that start time and end time.
But in between, right? So if a route was deleted and then added and then deleted and then added again, I'm going to see it 4 times, right?
Absolutely. You will see it 4 times.
That's
you only
exactly.
want to see it once. So back to your question. Sorry. First, let's make sure. Was that the question that you wanted to see it 4 times or you wanted to see it once?
Well, I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole, but
No.
Andrea, that's exactly right. I want to see it once. So thank you for pointing out that might not be the behavior. I want to know, you guys know, I want to know, am I missing a route? Big time, that was there before we started, and it's now we were done. We think we're done, and that route's not there. What happened?
Exactly. So to Andrea, so again, thanks for clarifying that specific point, Andrea. You would see it exactly as you said 4 times. If you want to see it only once, you say again start time, end time, and view equals latest.
Okay.
You would see the last change. If the last change was a delete, you will see it as a deleted entry.
And that tells me exactly,
then you will see it as an add. But if it changed next hop 3 times because interfaces were coming up or whatever, and so it was 1 next hop, then 2 next hop, then 3 next hop, for as an example, you can just say the latest and you can see whether it got the 3 next hops.
But I like the workflow. I can use show table to make sure that I'm actually now polling my 10 devices again. And then I can go into route and the typical show commands to understand what, if anything, has changed and when it changed.
And you can do route summarize to see if you got the number of devices route summarize, for example, shows you a bunch of things, right? So let's just, since we are at it, let's just do it. So if I do route summarize and XOS find, I see a bunch of information. It says 10 devices, there are 66 unique prefixes. You can quickly, by putting start time and end time, you can see, do you have 66 prefixes? If that's the case, then you say like, I wanted expected 66 to change. I got that count correctly.
Yep.
You can look at the unique verbs. For example, maybe one verb didn't update. Maybe your automation script had a bug, thereby it only updated the default route and not the other. But because you put the start time and end time, it'll show you that only one verb changed. And then you right away know like, oh, why did not all 4 verbs change?
And did I, in multicast also included or not yet?
No, multicast is not included.
Okay.
Somebody in this call is responsible for it.
Oh, because that's usually where we trip up is we forget about checking the multicast.
It's coming very shortly. I'm hoping.
Thank you, Steven.
Sorry, Steven. I don't mean to. I was just teasing when I said that.
Trust me, we got a lot more migrations happening, so it's going to be handy when you get it, or when we can get it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So that's the way. And then back to Andrea's point, you can see all the changes, or you can just use start time, end time, view equals latest to see only the last change.
And so, Dinesh, I apologize if I miss it, but is there a way to make a snapshot diff of a point in time A and a point in time B, so that, for example, I do a software upgrade with switch. I know that the switch has rebooted, I don't know, 3 times, and I know the routes have changed multiple times, but I only care to make sure that what I have now is the same as what I had before.
So let me make sure I understand. Your point is, let's take, for example, a snapshot at T1. I took a snapshot at 10 o'clock today. I have a set of routes, whatever those routes are. Then I took a snapshot at 11 o'clock after all my changes are done. I don't care how many times the device rebooted, routes changed. All my automation is done. Now I'm at 11 o'clock. What I want to do is make sure that there is no diff, meaning exactly the route that was, if route 10.1.1 was pointing out interface 5, you want to make sure that route 10.1.1 is pointing out interface 5 at 11 o'clock. That's, yes. If it is not, let me know. If they are identical, don't tell me anything.
Yes, correct.
That does not exist. You don't have a way to say, show me exactly the diff and nothing, only tell me if something changed. Not the timestamp, but that something changed. We could add that feature. We don't have that. We can add that feature whereby we can say, ignore the timestamp. Because the basic idea is basically to say, ignore the timestamp, show me the difference between the two, only if there is a difference, otherwise delete it. I mean, don't show it. When I say delete it from the show and filter it out from the output. We don't have that particular option. Thanks for clarifying that one more time.
But that would be handy. That right there would be my part of my testing, to close out my ticket, right, for the weekend work.
Yeah.
And I didn't even really have to do anything extra.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good point. We don't have that specific one.
What are you doing Sunday night, Andrea?
Yeah. So,
I'm kidding.
The way to do that, I was just thinking as we were speaking, the only way I can think of doing that today is to redirect the output to a file and then diff the file.
Yeah.
Just to say, also, we have a library called JDiff that we were thinking to try and do something similar by taking the snapshot, the points in time snapshot data from SuzieQ, and doing it as a, and then you can compare to JSON objects like that or others, and there's a few other things you can do with that, but that was our take. But having it integrated would be pretty amazing. Yeah. No, it would be, I agree. But like I said, I was pointing out, if you're trying to do something on Sunday night, by which time you may not have it, Claudia, the simplest way to do it would be to write the output to a file and then diff the file.
Yep.
End time 10 o'clock, end time 11 o'clock, diff between the two files, no diff, you're good.
Yeah.
I'm also always trying to provide a way that is not a feature that has to be added in order for you to be able to do with what you have right now, even if it's a little clunky. If you can at least make progress, then it's better. And I think writing to two files and doing a diff is hopefully not much clunkier. I mean, it's clunkier than if it just gave you an answer yes or no, but it is still, you can close out your ticket pretty quickly, I hope. I'm sorry, someone's at the door. If you could just give me 1 second, I'll be back. I apologize for this.
No worries, Dinesh. But thank you, Andrea. And one of the clients I work with, they got their ticketing process was audited, and they are I guess there was a finding, right, that they needed to do more in terms of testing and QA. So I've been trying to use SuzieQ a lot more to make that a little bit easier for us.
Yeah, no problem. I manage networks as well, so I know exactly where we were trying to go. Yes. And yeah, one of the things that before SuzieQ or sometimes even now we have to do, it's just to compare the before and after to make sure that it's identical. For some stuff, we use Ansible. For some other stuff, we have used just a diff. For other stuff, we have used the SuzieQ, how do you call it, start and end time. Depending what we were doing. Unfortunately, there was never one answer for every single use case.
Yep.
But hopefully we will get there.
Exactly. You know, you never think about how long it takes you to put in the testing information to close out a ticket. I'm not sure these days I'm doing as much with tickets, opening and closing them, than I am actual network work,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the start time and end time, for example, they are really, really good. And I've used it a lot to troubleshoot either intermittent issues or things like flops in general. And that could be, a route is flopping, or even a MAC address is flopping. That really finds good use with the start and end time, because it shows you how things flop and how things move over time. So you might find that the route disappeared for, I don't know, half an hour, and then you figured out what happened during that half an hour that caused the route to disappear. But if you are expecting things to change like we were discussing now, and you only care about the state, that's where the diff comes more useful.
More useful. You're right. We use the time frame. So one of the reasons we started using SuzieQ to find out where MAC addresses kind of traveled across the network for a segmentation project. And it's like, oh no, that MAC's on the network. Well, no, we don't see it on the network right now, but we saw where it came off the network on Monday. Oh yeah, we and then it sparks
exactly
the memory, right? Oh yeah, that's right. It went down, like, yeah, I told you. So it's been super useful for that kind of thing.
I'm back. Thanks for holding fort while I was gone, instead of there being an awkward silence.
No worries, Dinesh, that's all right. We were just sharing the pain.
Yeah. And I was back pretty quickly, but you guys were having a good conversation, so I just let it continue. All right, so we talked about table show, what are the ways you can quickly use it, and what you can eyeball. Any questions on that? Okay, moving on to the next one then, namespaces. The next one, so what I'm doing, if you'll kind of notice, is I'm approaching it almost like I'm zooming in. I'm starting from a very high level and I'm zooming into individual specific tables and specific things, so that you can get a sense of your network from a very high level to a pretty low level. Because zooming in and out of networks, both in time and space, is something that I think SuzieQ does quite effectively, even if there are a few more things we can add, like diff. And Rick will say, like, Dinesh, I asked you this in my second SuzieQ community meetup, but Rick is not here to say that. He was here a while back. But anyway, the other thing you can notice very quickly is you say, like, okay, what does table summarize say? Before we end with table, let's take a look at what does table summarize say. Table summarize will tell you very quickly things like what is the earliest timestamp, what is the last timestamp across all namespaces in this particular case. So you're not, again, eyeballing different tables and trying to make sense of it. So across all tables, when was the first time you gathered data and when was the last time you gathered data. But it also gives you the 99th percentile of the first time and the 99th percentile of the last time, which is a way for you to know, do you have most of your data in a particular time window, or is it just completely scattered? So you get that as well. And of course, you can always use specific timestamps, namespaces and other filters to be able to do what you want. Okay. So moving along to the next one then is namespace. Namespace used to be called network for those of you who kind of use SuzieQ, say maybe in version 16 on, and that was deprecated, I believe, in version 18, and in the next release, I'll be taking that out. There is still network find, which is the endpoint tracker, that will stay, but network show, to be able to look at the names, what we actually are calling namespace show now, is something that will not be available as network show. It will only be namespace show. So in our case, if you do namespace show, what you get is a sense of how many different namespaces you have. And for those of you who wonder how to use namespaces, we have had that discussion several times. The short answer is namespace is just a grouping of devices that's convenient for you. A lot of people tend to use namespaces as sites. Some people use namespaces as customers. If you've got a combination of namespace and customer, and therefore namespace alone isn't good enough, that's a separate thing we will be adding in the enterprise. But for now, we have a static tag called namespace that's typically used for sites. So when you look at namespace show, for example, you will see that what are the different namespaces, how many devices are present. But now you see there is a different way of looking at it, which is how many services are present for each namespace, if there are any errors. And in this particular case, you'll see a lot of errors because I have one device that was not polled at all, that could not be polled. And so all of them show up as errors. And you can see quickly, do I have OSPF? Do I have BGP? Does this have VXLAN? Does it have MLAN? So whenever you're trying to understand across your sites, do I have something to be able to go fix, troubleshoot, deal with? You can quickly take a look at this to figure out, oh, I'm refreshing. I only have 3 sites today which use VXLAN with eVPN. The rest of them still use the old layer 2, layer 3 access aggregation model. Or, I only have these sites which are dual attached. These other sites are not dual attached. You can find that out quickly. Can you use table show for that as well in a way? Yeah, you can, but this is a more precise and short answer to what you're looking for. And the same thing with last update. It'll tell you very quickly when was it that you had a device that was last updated. But besides this, you can also do things like we're doing a network refresh across all sites, and I don't know if a particular site has a model or does not have a model. Or you don't know if a particular, what are all the sites which have all a specific model. For example, you've got a particular CVE and you have to go address it for a particular device. You want to see what all sites have it. You can always use namespace show with that particular option. So for example, in this particular case, I would say I want to know all the sites that have Cisco as the vendor. And because that's Cisco. And you'll see that these are the sites that have Cisco as the vendor. Or you can do it on a model. And you want to know, okay, but what are all the different models? Again, what are all the different models? How many different models? The keyword you'd use would be unique. And in this particular case, you can't use unique because model is not a value. It's not a filter within unique. In order to do that, you would have to go into device and be able to look at it through device. But you can use namespace show to be able to take a look at, for example, figuring out the model as well. If there is a particular model or a particular NOS or a particular version of a particular NOS, all of those, you can use the namespace show with filters. So you can say, for example, I want to see everything that has version that is greater than 9.3.3, and the OS is NXOS. What all namespaces, what all sites have it, and you will only get those. Okay. Any questions on namespace show? The query string. So one of the things that we have across all of these commands is a thing called query string. And you will see that with every command namespace show, you have a query string, you have route summarize, you have a query string. You always have query strings present. The query string is a Hail Mary pass if SuzieQ can't filter out something very easily. And the way you would use that is to actually specify a pandas query string. On the website, on the online documentation site, there are a bunch of different examples of how you can look at querying and what are the pandas query strings look like. If you have any questions, always please ask on the SuzieQ channel. We'll be happy to help you with constructing a pandas query string. But that's your Hail Mary pass to figure out anything that isn't present. However, the query string works only on what you can see at the end. because it's the last thing we apply. It's not the first thing we apply. It's the last thing we apply before we display the data to you. So the Hail Mary pass doesn't work as the first thing to apply. For example, if you want to do a complex model, comma, NOS, comma, some other matchup, and only display that, that will not happen before. We will still get all the data as per the filters, and then at the end apply the query string. So you will see the output that you want, but it's not applied at the very start. What does that mean from another perspective? If you do namespace unique or namespace summarize, the query string will not operate on the show data. It will operate on whatever you see as the summarized data. Does that make sense? Do I need to explain it again? Okay, so that's how you would proceed with using the query string. If you can't figure something out, the query string would be your Hail Mary pass. And let's see how that is done in some of the next set of tables that we look at. So namespace, again, is to get a quick purview of your sites. What do those sites contain? How many devices? Whatever is going on. For example, in this particular case, just to show you what is going on, and also to be able to look at what is the last update. When was the device, when was the site last updated, if you are trying to figure out if there is a particular problem. So you can simply type namespace show, and you can specify the namespace, and you will see the last update. The last update does not tell you. If you remember, table show tells you for every table, when was the last update. This just tells you at a quick glance, when was the last update. Is your poller even working, or has the poller crashed and everything is dead? It may not tell you. It may say it polled last, but it won't tell you that maybe the BGP table didn't work. So you'd use table show for that. So one other thing now we can do is we can say namespace stop, and you can say device count. And I believe you can say count equals 1. You can say, I just want to see 1, which is the top device that is present. And you will see that it will be this one. And you can always reverse it. So you can see which has got, I believe there is reverse equals true, and it'll tell you which is the site which has the least number of devices. You can use that for all the different numeric columns that you have. Make sense?
It does.
Okay. So with that, we finished table show and we finished namespace. The next table that I want to look at is device. So again, I'm approaching it from now. I want to look at individual devices. Have I gathered, then build up to the higher level services, whether they be LLDP, a MAC, routing protocol, or EVPN, which is for VXLAN. And then there are other things like path and topology, which we'll cover, which are tables built on top of tables by doing a whole bunch of analysis. We'll look at those later. So we've got namespace. What is the next one, which is device? So device, as you can imagine, is a listing of a bunch of different fields, which is what is it for that namespace? What is a host name? What is a model associated with it? What version do we use? What's the vendor? What architecture, if that is provided? Status, whether it's alive, dead, it has never been polled. What address, that is, this is the address that we use to poll the device. So if you want to know what address am I using to connect to a device, it is this particular address. And then when was the device booted last? But in reality, there are a whole bunch of fields that we don't show. Every table has a bunch of fields that we don't show. Basically, again, the key point is we are trying to avoid overwhelming the user with data. Trying our best to stick with this maxim, which is most of us can hold 7 pieces of information in our head, plus or minus 3. So if we can show you just 7 pieces of information, then you can make sense of it much faster. Again, the basic idea is to reduce the cognitive load as you're trying to make sense of your network. So if you want to know what are the other columns that I have, if you type device describe, you get the list of all the columns that are present. So you can see that there is something called uptime, which is not displayed. What is shown is instead a boot up timestamp. There is a serial number that is present, and then there is a reason. So for example, you can say, hey, I want to know what is the most common reason why a particular device reboots. So you could use stop there, but top does not work on account of the number of reasons. So what you would do is, if for that specific case, you would say device unique, column equals reason, and count equals true. And you can say, let's pick a real world example, this particular, and you would see that there were 38 reasons. The most common reason why a particular network got changed is because of a reset due to a patch install. You see that show up across 38 devices. So it's not like each device rebooted 38 times. It's 38 instances of that were found. So in this particular example, since the device, if you look at Acme, the device had 40 devices, it's just applied once.
Hey, Dinesh, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to set the default columns? Because for me, like I don't care about architecture and vendor, because we've got a Cisco environment, everything Cisco, so I know that's what that's going to be. But to have like serial number there or some other column instead, and not have to specify the columns every time I do a device show or something like that.
Yeah.
Is there a way to set what your default
not in the open
columns are?
source?
Okay.
But I want to be, you know, for example, let's take this example that you said. I don't care about architecture. Probably most people don't care about architecture. They all care about maybe the serial number. So what I would suggest, Andy, is start a thread on the SuzieQ Slack. Say like, hey guys, for me, I would like architecture replaced. I mean, you can start with a higher level question, which is, can I customize? I'll respond in a similar fashion as I did just now. And then you can say like, hey, look, I don't care about the architecture. That's meaningless to me. Can I instead replace architecture with serial number? And I suspect you'll get a lot of people saying, yes, yes, yes. Let's add that because that is generally applicable. Doing it specific to you because you only have Cisco seems customization, which is enterprise.
Right. No, I get it. Yeah.
But if it is general, it applies to everybody, and everybody would be better off with what you just suggested. I would do it that way. And I think your point is very valid. A serial number is much better.
Okay. Yeah, and then I know we've talked about that. You mentioned that is an option in the enterprise.
Yes, it's being added. It's not there right now, but it's
okay. Because you and I have had this discussion because I want I want vendor OUI and everything, and I do the same thing Andy's doing, right? I have my little column, fix it, right? Snippet that I add to every query.
Yeah, in the enterprise, I have this patch which I haven't managed to merge in yet, which is basically instead of saying columns equals and specifying everything, you could just put a plus on that column. That means take the default and just add this to it.
Okay.
That way you don't have to type everything. I think that would be a little. So let's start again. Customization in the enterprise will be done. It's not there today, but that's part of the enterprise plan. The second part is in the enterprise, we would add a plus. And in the open source, maybe it's possible, it's a little more painful, but things that are generally applicable to everyone, like throw out architecture and throw in serial number, please start a discussion on the mailing list, on the Slack channel. Happy to make the change. Those are like, I think just simple things that will benefit everyone.
Could I do an environment variable and then give that to my columns equals? Should I be quiet now?
No, you don't have to be quiet. You could ask that as a feature, just file a ticket on it and see what we can do. No, all of these, I don't think anybody needs to be quiet on anything. Please ask away. The part of it is, and I'll be as honest as I can about either A, it's not there. Yes, it is there, but only in the enterprise. We plan to only add it in the enterprise. Andy, does that address your question? And you're happy with the outcome? If you could pose that question, you'd get serial number and we'll throw out architecture.
Yep, that's perfect. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. The other part is there is also memory. So you can say like, hey, you know, I want to look at memory. Device session is something, there are a bunch of hidden fields which I don't think should be of any value to you guys. Device session, which we use to track every time a device reboots, because if a device reboots, all the old information needs to be refurbished. Because I think we talked about this a few meetups ago. The version before 0.20, if a device rebooted and all the interfaces came back in exactly the same state, you would have a reboot time which was today, but the device, you say, when was the last time you captured any information about the device? It would say 10 days ago, because 10 days ago the device first came up, or SuzieQ pulled it the first time, and nothing has changed since then. But that's a false information. The device rebooted, which means all the interfaces came up again, which means the last change was when you rebooted the device. So from 0.20, that is information is captured, and we use the device session for that. And then SQ version is used for schema evolution. So, you know, we add new fields. We can easily add new fields to this. It's not a big deal for us to add a new field and not have to throw out your entire old data. So if you have things like that, leaving out those, you should be able to filter out and look at all the information that you want. So here is an example, like I said, device unique. You use device to figure out how often has something, you know, what is the most common reason why your devices have rebooted in your network. Imagine you're a consultant coming into the network and you want to understand how stable is their network. You can simply run this and you can see how many times they've either patched the system, what else is going on, etc., etc. Okay. The other question you can, of course, ask is the same things that we talked about. You can say device unique, and you can say columns equals model, and namespace equals this, and you can see what are all the different model of devices that are used over there, or what all different versions are used over there. You can also get a sense of that, as always, by using a summarize. If you run device summarize, and give namespace equals Acme, you can see that there are 40 devices. There are no devices that are down, no unpolled devices. All of them are single vendor Cisco. There are 4 different models, and we saw what those are using unique. There's a single architecture, a single version, and a bunch of different uptimes. So in stat, when you see stat as a field, stat contains, it's a list of 3 items. And those 3 items are always the minimum, the maximum, and the median. I repeat, the median, not the mean. I wanted to actually make it the 99th percentile, but we felt like people are still not really comfortable with 99th percentile, so we left that out. But that's one of the things we want to be able to do, is show you percentiles, like, you know, what's the 90th percentile, what's the 99th percentile, because those might be much more accurate in what you are looking for. Any thoughts on that kind of output, that is 99 percentile versus median or mean? That's average.
I think it would be a neat thing to add.
Okay.
Kind of elevates the whole conversation about your devices and uptime.
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to start there, but people gave me a little pushback on like, no, people don't know what that means. Stick to what you know. So what they know, sorry, not what I know, what they know. So, okay. And again, you use the device table to get a sense of, are there any devices that are down? Are there unpolled devices? All of that you use the device table for. So you get a quick sense of what is going on, what devices you have, how many of them you have, etc., etc., etc. All of them, of course, are filterable. So if you say, for example, device summarize, and do I have a lot? Yeah. If let's just say I say OS equals NXOS, then you would only get those namespaces which have NXOS in them. You won't get the others. So you can break this down further by using filters for every one of the commands. And the fact that you can use these filters, these keyword filters across all of the commands, you can thank Andrea for it, because that was one of the first things. Andrea is in many ways really the first user of SuzieQ. He came in and he helped a lot with cleaning up a bunch of things. So we now have these filters across all of the different verbs. And you can use device top and say, like, and you can say what equals uptime, and you can see which devices are the ones that have been up for the longest time. This is 324 days and 6 hours and 12 minutes versus 6 hours and 11, 6 hours and 2, and so on. And the same thing applies. You can say device uptime, show me which one has the maximum memory. You can see the devices which have the maximum memory again. Any questions on device before we move on? Okay. The next one we'll look at is interfaces. And we may have time only for interfaces before we are done with this monthly meetup, and we'll continue with the others next meetup. But the next one you look at is interface. And as usual, we can start with interface summarize. And you can see what interface types there are. The first things you'll figure out is there are 40 interfaces, 40 devices, a total of 3,686 interfaces. And in this particular case, a VLAN counts as an interface, a VRF counts as an interface, actual physical interfaces count as an interface. If you have sub-interfaces, they count as additional interfaces, all of that. Devices with L2 count means that you've got devices which are not routed entries. You have a bunch of bridged entries. So you can see right away that this tells you that out of 40 devices, 36 devices have L2. If I tell you that this is a leaf spine architecture, you can say that probably those 4 are spines and there are 36 leaves. You can see that there are 36 devices with VXLAN on it, which kind of confirms that particular point. There are 207 down interfaces, 1,014 interfaces which are admin down. So again, you can get a very quick summary of what is going on. Any thought in looking at this? So there is also the speeds, how many different speeds are present, how many different MTUs are present. You get a count here very quickly of how many different MTUs are present. Any thoughts on any summarized information that you think you would like to see but is not there? Kind of like what you asked Andy, I would like to see serial number there but not architecture. Anything else that people would like to see here that is not present?
Optic.
Optics comes in inventory.
Okay.
And specifically when you say optics, what you're asking for, Claudia, to be clear, is how many different SFP, QSFPs I have, etc., right?
Yes, although I do think there's value in understanding that from what's in this interface.
You will get that, but you will get that only in the inventory. So you can say inventory type equals transceiver, and then you can say unique, or you can say show me the memory. You can get it that way. If you think that that is something that needs to be included here, please let me know. I'm happy to, because it's just a question of pulling another table to get that information.
Now,
sorry, Claudia. The question I had is the interface admin down count.
Yeah.
Is that just like an administrator actually going and shutting that interface, or is it also if the port air disables for some reason? Does it take that into account?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a good one.
The reason I said it's a good one, though, Claudia, you may have a different reason why you said it, is there was a bug whereby for certain kinds of devices, we would mark them as admin down, even though they were error disabled. And so that's a mistake, and I fixed that, and it's part of the patches that will come out in the next release.
Okay.
The user pointed out that I was marking devices as admin down, when in reality, they were only error disabled.
But error disabled would be a good one.
Yes, error disabled would be a good one to add over here. If you could open a ticket on error disabled, I'd be happy to add that. I agree.
Okay. So we have link down, administratively down, and then error disabled.
Yeah. The next thing is you can look at interfaces by types. The type information I have used because I guess of my most recent chronological heritage, I used Linux names and I use bond instead of port channel or ether channel or any of those names. I thought like a vendor neutral bond is kind of Linuxy, so it's kind of completely out of the domain of calling it port channel versus ether channel versus lag versus port aggregate or anything else that other people might use, link aggregate. So we just use the name bond. So the way you would look at is you would say interface show type equals bond and namespace equals, and you see all the interfaces that are those. Now, we in the open source, I plan to, but again, there are lack of time, various other things. You could add support for being able to see port channel members directly.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, so it would be nice if I could see all members which belong to port channel 1 very easily. Okay, you can't. So how would I do it today? So the way you would do it is you would say type equals bond slave, because that's the Linux name that was there. I should change that to bond member. I think it's not correct anymore to call it a bond slave, but it is what it is right now. And you can say query string master equals port channel 1. Today, this is kind of the kludgy way of being able to pull that information out. Did I change it to bond member or port channel 1 namespace equals? So that's fine. It didn't still show up. Maybe I can just take this out. Yeah, you will see that. Yeah, it's called bond space slave or underscore slave. Sorry, that's why. That should be there. So that's a quick way to see it. Same thing with respect to WRF. It would be nice if you had something, a WRF show, but you can always do interface show type equals WRF, and you would get the list of, oh, this is a lot. To again summarize it, to keep it simple, you can see what are the list of, and this is obviously for every host in the setup. Quick pop quiz, now that I've given this to you many times. If you just wanted to see the list of verbs, nothing more, not for every single device, what verb might you use?
Unique.
Yes. And you would say unique, columns equals type. And if you want to see how many of them there are in across all the devices, you'd say count equals true, and you would see this. I didn't specify namespace. If I use namespace, so yeah, you would see that that's the one across all the different namespaces. And all these multiple ones like flexible tunnel interface, GRE, all of that come from Junos, because I'm using in my simulation a Junos as an edge device. But this is, again, we normalize it unless it is something that's very specific to that device and there's really no way to map it to any device like flexible tunnel interface. We map everything into unique types. So you will always see. So no matter what anybody else calls it. So for example, Junos will call it a routing instance. We call it a WRF and it will show up as WRF. Same thing with sub interface. Same thing with VXLAN, VTEP, etc. So you also, sorry, there was a question. You can also get a sense of stop. You can say use stop, and you can say what equals number of changes. And in this particular case, we can look at a real customer site to see how many times a particular interface flapped. And you can see here that this interface on that device flapped 110 times. So this is a quick way for you to be able to isolate and say, hey, what interface is caused the problem? I'm sorry, what interface is flaky? So this might be a quick way for you to figure out if, a cable is going down or has, is flaky, causing the interface to go up and down many times. As usual, interface has actually a lot of entries. So if you look at interface describe, you'll see there are about 31 different entries that are present, and we don't show all of them. So you can look at some of them by looking at each individual one and then being able to do. So description is a string that we don't display, but you can use description with query string as an example and be able to take a look at what is present in it.
So if there's a certain type of just naming convention for an interface description, it's completely queryable, right?
Yes. So you can say, then you can say interface show query string description, is, put a regular expression, contains, is in, give a set of different matches. You can get all of those working. It's just a pandas query string at that point.
Okay.
Also, we don't show the interface MAC, and that is burned in MAC address. So we will show that as well. And there is MAC address, which is not the burned in MAC. So we have both of them present. And then we have the number of changes. And of course, there is port mode and VLAN list. So you can say, show me all the ports which are, so if people want to know where a particular port is present, you can see all the ports which are essentially access ports. Same thing with trunk. We also have source VTEP IP, which is the IP address that is used to go with that interface. For example, Junos does this. That's the only way I get the information about the source VTEP. So if that's present, you can get that as well. Always just look at it from your interface information perspective, and you should be able to see what you're looking for. A corresponding thing. So for those of you who use interfaces, you know that almost everybody also provides the equivalent of a show IP interface, which means show me the IP addresses associated with an interface. We have a similar thing, and that is called address show. And you can use address show to be able to look at things, but you can also use address show with things like type equals loopback to be able to only see loopback IP addresses. And you can use the same thing, address show, with various other choices to see how many interface IP addresses are present. So if you do address summarize again, as a simple example, let's keep it to a simple one. You'll see here that there are also things called subnet top counts. We show you what subnets are used for interface addresses. Basically, we use 32, 24, 30, 31, and there's a /2 that obviously will be coming from a Juniper that's using it for some internal purpose. And subnet top counts will tell you how many of each type are present. So there are 44 interfaces with /32 on them, 21 interfaces with /24 on them, 12 interfaces with /30 on them, as an example. You also can get a quick sense of, am I using IPv6 in my network? This will tell you unique v6 address count is 0. So there are no addresses, interfaces with IPv6 addresses assigned to them in your particular namespace. So with this, I'll come to a stop here. also see if I can put out cheat sheets so people can look at, if this is my question, what command do I type? If people have some ideas on how that would be, how you might like to see it if it was present, integrated into the CLI somehow, is it a separate cheat sheet that we put up for, download and play with separately? Do let me know, please. And do people find this useful, this way of presenting table by table so that you can actually take a look at and understand what questions you are seeking to answer and how the tables might help you answer those questions?
I certainly
Yeah,
do.
I think this format is really good.
Yeah,
To look at
agree.
it table by table.
Okay. And like I said, I'll do table by table first, and then we can come back and then do a next higher level pass over. How do I look at things across tables to make sense of the network?
Yeah, and I apologize. I've got to prep for my next meeting, so I gotta have to drop off. Thank you so
No
much,
worries.
Dinesh.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
guys.
And so with that, then let me first stop the recording. And